Welcome to the Flight808.com interview series. We're very honored to have our very first guest, Dr. Halifu Osumare. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Very good. Halifu is an associate professor of African American and American Studies at UC Davis and holds a doctorate in American Studies. She's here to chat with us about her recently published book entitled The Africanist Aesthetic in Global Hip-Hop, Power Moves. The book looks at how hip-hop culture has become a global phenomenon. Welcome, Halifu.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Very good. First of all, I guess I'd like to just start with just talking about your background and how you came to be inspired to write a book on the international aspect of hip-hop.
Well, I basically see hip-hop culture as a current day manifestation of African American culture that is very steeped in a long history of an aesthetic that goes back to West Africa, the spirituals and the field hollers during slavery, the blues, the country blues, the urban blues, jazz, R&B, and all the dance forms that were inspired by those musical forms. I grew up in San Francisco and lived in my adult years, early adult years in Oakland. And so I was aware of some of the early West Coast rap scene, but because it wasn't my generation, I didn't really pay that much attention to it. And it wasn't until I moved to Hawaii in the 90s when I was getting my doctorate that I was looking for a subject that could allow me to talk about this broad trajectory historically of African American music and dance and culture and its influence not only on the U.S. but the entire world. Right. And so many of the youth that lived around me in a rural area of Hawaii were modeling their identities on hip hop. They were playing all the current day rappers at that time. Master P was definitely on the forefront of gangster rap at that time, and you'd hear him a lot, and of course Tupac and others. And I just felt that this was really a current day, in-your-face phenomenon of this whole idea of the influence of African American culture on world culture. And I said, well, what better expression to explore than what the youth are doing today, hip-hop culture. So that's basically how I got into it, but from the angle of this is a current day manifestation of a long history of an aesthetic that has been influencing the world, animating the world, getting the world to dance to the same beat. Right. And this is, there's more than most adults see to this, and I want to explore what that is.
Right. So that's the Africanist aesthetic that you're speaking about.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, it has a lot of components to it, but that's the long and short of it.
Right. Okay. Very good. Another one of the central themes of your book is the concept of connective marginality, and you hold that hip hop is by its globalization, that it is a unifying culture, unifying genre of music in some ways. And can you explain exactly what you mean by connective marginality?
Yes, well, most people are aware that American pop music in general has become the music of youth around the world because of our economic clout and the major music industries that are multinational corporations like EMI, Universal, Sony, of course Viacom through MTV and BET and the images that get pervade around the world. But they're not always aware that, especially because of the internet, there are a lot of loose-knit, connected hip-hop crews and collectives around the world that know about each other and that are in communication with each other. And so there are various underground, if you will, networks among hip-hoppers themselves.
Right.
And this manifests in terms of b-boy collectives, graffiti crews, as well as MCs that are doing collaborations across boundaries and borders of countries. And I think what connects them even more than the American music industry is the sense that they all want to use hip-hop for a voice to talk back to the system. And there are various components of what they have to say in that talking back process. And it's class issues. Sometimes it's about marginalization based on ethnicity, but class is very strong in most places. It's youth itself, that oftentimes youth are denigrated, marginalized, and hip-hop has given them a way of speaking to the adult population, that they do have a voice and they do have something to say about what's going on, and they're not being duped by mainstream adult corruption in their society, et cetera, et cetera. And that happens everywhere on the planet. So it's given them a voice to talk back as youth, to rise above the class status that they feel they might have been born into. There is this idea of historical oppression, and I found that among Native Hawaiians, that just as African Americans and Native Americans in this country, there's a sense of being historically oppressed. So that rap music in particular can give them a voice to speak to that historical oppression. Right. And lastly, culture. And by culture, I mean the Africanness aesthetic itself, where it has been born and as a part of the African diaspora, African peoples being dispersed throughout the Americas first and now throughout the world. That culture itself has been put down and denigrated. The African-based rhythms and beats, no matter where you find them, have never been seen as high art. And so I think that there are resonating cultural issues like in Brazil, in Cuba, in Jamaica, which is one of the sources of hip-hop itself, right here in the Bronx. Right. You know, the Jamaicans coming here as immigrants and bringing those rhythms and the sound system culture, etc. That kind of marginalized culture, even though it has brought the world together in a lot of ways, has always been put down as low art. And so, in some ways, hip-hop is bringing up an aesthetic that has always been seen as low art, and making it, through the youth of the world, being seen as something that is really relevant and important.
Right, definitely. I think that's what's, one of the things that's interesting about it is that it is the de facto rebel music of the day. Yes. around the globe. And you have, I mean, music has, different genres of music have always, you know, different genres have played that part in the past, like in the late 70s, early 80s, punk music coming out of England, which was based on a reaction to classism there. That spread to the United States, but what is different about hip-hop now, I think, is that because of the globalization through media, etc., it has spread much more than any other genre before it has, and it speaks, no matter what you're rebelling against, you know, it can speak to you.
Right, right. And even right here, the relationship between hip-hop and punk was seen early on in the 70s. Yeah, you know, with collaborations between Fab Five Freddy and Blondie, and you know, and the Soho art scene there, and what was going on in the Bronx, and them kind of coming together and going to each other's neighborhoods and really beginning to collaborate. So that relationship between rebellious youth cultures, you know, was right there from the very beginning.